So we're looking at Jeff right now. We can tell how good looking he is, but aside from that, how did you choose Jeff to be your winemaker, and why is the relationship between you and your winemaker so important?
Well, we started with a winemaker named Ryan Peace when we first got going. And Ryan's, every winemaker has a different style, and we did not intend ever to get into that part. We like to consider ourselves more or less the farmers, even though we don't do all the farming. That's for sure. We pimp our friends for that. Thank you all. But when we decided it was time to move on from differences in terms of barrel aging and different kinds of things, we had a lot of people recommend Jeff to us. Jeff is at Onyx Winery in Tin City in downtown Paso, and just a great group. And I think it was amazing to us how instantaneously Jeff's winemaking style and our thoughts about what could happen and should happen to the grapes were aligned. So we feel very fortunate. He also, as many of the folks on this call will attest, he's a very gracious host. So when you come to Onyx, if you're in Paso and you want to do a little tasting, you need to make sure to talk to Jeff. He has a crazy encyclopedic wine mind, but he also has this ability to dumb it down. So those of us who are trying to understand what the heck's going on learn something each and every time.
Well, I can tell you that before this event, we spent some time on a call getting to know each other, Shea and Grant and Jeff. And I have spent time with many, many winemakers over the last 33 years. And if I were going to go insane and start a winery, Jeff would be like probably one of my first choices for winemaker. Incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly great guy aside, but
well, you can't have him, Todd.
I know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so what other types of people are involved in the winemaking process aside from your core guy, Jeff?
Oh goodness. Well, to keep it short, we'll. Yeah, unfortunately, whether it's 4 acres or 400 acres, it's got all the same folks, right? So we have a vineyard manager. His name is Steve Vieira. He's from the Derby Wine Estate, which is a large group in Central California. Steve actually is a soil entomologist. He's a Cal Poly SLO grad, and he was one of the only ones in the beginning, as we were talking about, that actually said, yeah, okay, let's do this. He was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's test the soil. So he literally did all the soil testing and helped us do the aspect ratios and lay the vineyard out and do everything from the get-go. He's been our manager ever since. So he calls the shots out there along with Jeff. Then we also have a group led by Johnny Sandoval. Johnny comes from Justin Winery, not too far away. And Johnny does all of the maintenance, the trapping, et cetera. There's a lot of work. So he's there a lot. And then we also have various different crews, ranging from the pruning crew to the netting crew to the spraying crew to the harvest and delivery crews.
Our friends crew.
Yeah. So although we like to do a lot of the work ourselves, it's just a little bit too big with 4,761 vines, but who's counting, to do it on our own. So we're lucky enough to have a good size a group that's always on call.
So to summarize, it takes a village, and good pun to do it on a Rhone, since you're producing some Rhone varietal. So excellent. Last question for you. Broad, but what are some of the challenges and gifts of producing wine?
Okay, we'll start with the positive first, the gifts, which there are many. I would say the best part of this vineyard is how it brings people together, our friends and family, and great food with it. That's probably the biggest gift for sure. And also the learning, at this stage of your life when you're forgetting everything, it's great to be learning new things all the time. I think it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a constant learning process. Wine is like that in general, right? The whole wine world. You open one door, there's 10 more, and on and on and on. Challenge wise, too numerous to mention. It's a lot of work. But as we say, I don't golf. It's kind of my golf. And the thing about it is that every year is a little bit different, and I like that. I like the learning part a lot. I would say, the biggest challenge is just keeping up with everything. It's seasonal, but every season's a little bit different. It's funny because they say, when you do something like this, another saying that goes along with it is the first generation that puts the vineyard in spends all the money. The second generation reaps all the benefits, and the third generation runs it into the ground. So we'll see about that. We certainly know the first round is true, but it wouldn't have it any other way.
Hopefully the third round will not come to fruition.
I agree.
For your benefit. So at this point, we're going to meet the star of the show, who makes the beautiful wine that we're going to taste shortly, unless you couldn't wait and have already been tasting it. So their winemaker, Jeff Streckes, was raised in small town Connecticut. He has a degree in biochemical engineering. And when he found that there were striking similarities to winemaking, he abandoned his other dream of becoming a CDC virus hunter, which Lord knows we could use right now, but we got other ones going on, and made a beeline to UC Davis for his MS. I'll add, UC Davis has the foremost enology or wine making program in the country. He worked at Maryvale in St. Helena, Franciscan Estates in St. Helena, Round Pond Estate in Rutherford, Molly Duker in McLaren Vale, which is a personal favorite of mine, owned by Sarah and Sparky Marquis, who some of you may have met because they've been at the Manhattan Wine Auction a couple of years ago. They make amazing wines. And currently, as the Kirkpatricks mentioned, at Onyx, spelled ONX, all capitals, in Paso Robles, where he also started a custom crush business specializing in guiding and providing a home for high-end boutique wine brands like William Robert Wines. So welcome, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here. First question for you. You started in biochemical engineering and pivoted to winemaking. How in the world did that happen?
Before I even fully answer that, I just, over the course of this short half hour here, came to realize something. And I think I now understand why Todd and I get along so well with so little previous interaction. And, I think in one sense we're brothers from another mother, but in a more specific resonance, I would almost sort of say, I think we both to each other represent the other path we could have taken. What I didn't tell Todd in our first meeting was actually I had applied early admission to MIT for a chemical engineering
degree. Geez, really? You did not tell me that. Wow.
Waitlisted and shot down and ended up going and getting my degree from the engineering school right down the street in Worcester Polytechnic Institute.
Wow. You did not tell me that. Wow.
Even beyond that, I actually turned down some overtures from law firms looking to sponsor people through patent law school, and ended up going the industry pharmaceutical route for a few years until deciding to pursue wine. So I think we walked the same path and yet took that slight divergence and both ran with it.
Wow. Well, I'm envious because I'd love to be doing what you're doing. And I'm going to say you probably belonged at MIT more than I did, but ancient history. So
only for my Boston Red Sox affinity, but I spent time living outside of Philadelphia in Conshohocken as well.
Oh, I know it. I know it well. So how'd you decide to work with the Kirkpatricks and William Robert Winery?
Well, initially they had made contact with me, but as tends to be the case, I always, whenever someone's interested, I try to sit down with them and just take the time to understand, what their business is, what their goals are. It's can be a little bit of sorting out the folks who just have impossible to meet expectations, but I think ultimately one of the things that really struck me about the family was they truly just wanted to make the most expressive wine possible from their site. There were no, you know, immediate expectations, which I see come up quite frequently. You know, in Napa, it was, I want to be the next Screaming Eagle. And down here, well, I just want to follow the path that Saxum did. And that's kind of like saying your retirement plan is winning the lottery. You know, I can't say it won't happen, but it requires a lot of luck to swing your way, more so than skill or planning can dictate. And you know, I think I was just struck for their, you know, by their love for their site, which I know we can say something like that on a video like this very flippantly, but if you ever go up to the ranch, and I highly recommend it if you have the opportunity, and get to see Grant kind of walking through the vines. And well, I think the best way I can frame it is he originally built a couple of homes on the lakefront there. And since this harvest started, I noticed they're doing a little bit of construction and building out the bunkhouse right next to the vineyard. And I think, Grant, you phrased it to me that the more time you spend up there, the more you spend out in the vineyard, as opposed to playing with all the toys in the water. So I think it just speaks to that heart and soul connection to the property and the vineyard to really want to get out there and be amongst it.
All right. So for those who don't know what Jeff mentioned, Screaming Eagle in Napa is the cult winery of Napa, and therefore in the entire U.S. Saxum, owned by Justin Smith, is the cult winery of Paso, mailing list only, impossible to get on the mailing list, etc. And I think that's what we're striving for always. So let's talk about winemaking styles, Jeff. Winemaking styles vary from highly interventionist to minimalist. What's yours and why?
You know, I think my style does change a little bit depending on the goals of, you know, a person directing a program, as well as with the sites I'm working with. As it relates to the Kirkpatrick's site at Split Rock Ranch for William Robert wines, I'm happy to say that ultimately we are very minimalist in terms of only intervening when and where absolutely necessary. So they're not a vineyard that does an incredible amount of passes where it feels like you're landscaping a property instead of farming it. You know, step in where necessary, but otherwise, even on the winemaking side, the goal is to ultimately let the fruit be the best expression of itself. And my job as winemaker, in truth, is really just not to mess it up. So, you know, a little bit of pressure there, but at the same time, I really enjoyed, ever since, you know, helping or starting to help out with the family, being able to separate all the blocks into you know, their own individual small fermentations, so you can really say, you know, this half an acre really adds this bit of character to it, or this Syrah always ripens 1 week earlier than this block that's right next door, just because of the shallowness of the soil and the steepness of the hillside. You know, and just letting each small block turn into its own component, or, you know, different bit of spice that then you blend together and truly try to make the best cuvées that we can.
So as someone much wiser than me once said, you can make bad wine from great grapes, but you can't make great wine from bad grapes. So farming is a very important component of the winemaking process. And even if you get great grapes, you need to know what to do with them, which obviously Jeff does, having tasted some of his wines. So we could talk for hours, and we kind of did in our first meeting, about the variables that are included in the winemaking process. But spend a couple of minutes summarizing your process for William Robert, including comparing it to how you make wines for other producers if it's different. And I'm talking about things like whole cluster fermentation versus not, pump over versus punch down, differences in oak barrels, French versus American, new versus used, low toast versus high toast, etc. Take it away, Jeff.
Yeah, so one thing I've really embraced with Split Rock Ranch, as I just sort of mentioned, was really trying to do almost that micro fermentation level where I have lots that are only 3/4 of a ton or maybe even slightly less, but that all come from slightly different sections, and really being able to ferment them individually, press them separately, and have all of these different barrels of wine when it comes time to the final blending, which can be a bit unwieldy. I think I may have gotten the family a little bit drunk on the blending decisions for the 2018, but that's part and parcel. We all learn to spit eventually, but as we go through that, it's just been so much fun working with the family, measuring that. Another place I tend to do things a little differently. Well, I should say all of those small fermentations very much require just doing regular punch downs. So pushing the cap where all the skins float to the top of the fermenter back down in, doing that 2 to 3 times a day by hand. No pump overs because we're not using those big tanks where you kind of cram a lot of tonnage into. So it's all very labor intensive, done by hand. On the pressing side, I do everything with a fairly old school basket press. So maybe a little less mechanical pressing efficiency, but it's just incredibly gentle on the wine. It doesn't leave you really heavy, hard phenolic press fractions. Just really aiming everything with the full goal of making the wine as expressive as possible. Finally, I'd say maybe on the oak side, one thing I found through doing a couple of subsequent years of experimentation with everyone in the family is we've really leaned our direction into a little bit more old world approach to oak. Focused in on a couple of cooperages, so the barrel makers that are actually based in the Bordeaux in France. So using some very traditional cab style barrels that just we're using all French oak, primarily from center of France forests. And just to throw you guys an interesting tidbit out there, the reason all of these forests in France that we make barrels from actually exist is they originally were taken over by the French government to grow consistently tall and straight ship masts. And then once the shipping industry kind of fell away and we started making ships differently, it turned into being used for both oak barrels and high-end stagecoach making, which is why the word limousine actually came around, because it's actually the name of one of those oak forests in France that we can make barrels from.
All right, so I'm just going to add to that for those who don't know that red wine gets all of its character from the skins of the grapes and skin contact with the wine. So if you have no skin contact, you wind up with white Zinfandel, for example, which is a hardy red grape. Most of you have probably had Zinfandel. And if there's no skin contact, it's basically a light pink wine of the nature of rosé. So it's important how you contact the skins with the wine. And that's what Jeff was talking about with pump over, which means you've got a layer of skins on top of the wine. And in order to get skin contact, you can go to the bottom of the barrel and pump it over on top of that layer. Or you can do punch down, which means you punch that layer of skins down through the wine. And winemakers vary that depending on what they want to achieve from the skins. And it's really important because there's different types of tannins that you get. And if you have the wrong types of tannins, you get very bitter, astringent tannins. What you want are the sweet, smooth, silky tannins. And wizards like Jeff know how to accomplish that. So just a quick point. So how do you know, Jeff, when you have a particularly good vintage, and how do your winemaking techniques vary depending on the vintage?
I think you start to suspect it in the vineyard just as you're tasting through. You start noticing either really great intense tannins as you chew on the grape skins. Maybe you notice getting seed ripeness a little earlier than usual. Maybe you just see blocks that look far more even than they normally would. But ultimately, I think it typically gets confirmed when you actually get those first few lots of grapes into the winery every year, and you really start seeing just how consistent and where the chemistry of those lots are. 2018 was an example of what I think, all said and done, 10 years from now, we're going to say was California's vintage of the decade. At least all of us on the production side say it. The critics seem to have liked 17 better, but I stand pretty firmly by the fact that I think we're all going to look back and love that particular year. And I think it just shows through early, but I think in years where the grapes turn out differently, ultimately what we change up in our procedure is just how we manage that level of extraction. So trying to pull out all those good tannin and phenolic compounds that Todd was just mentioning. As basically by how we handle managing that extraction, whether it's through temperature, because the hotter a ferment gets, the more extraction you're going to pull out, whether it's purely through fluid movement. So if you're doing pump overs and tanks, like I know guys following a certain popular Napa style that will do 2-hour long pump overs and just moving as much volume over the cap of the fruit as they can. And all of those procedures are basically intended to, in a powerful year, they'll just make this giant, like, monolithic wine that's just huge. But in years where the fruit's a little weaker or not as potent, then that's how you kind of bring it back to like a normal level. So lots of different theories of application, lots of different ways to do it, but all very subtle variations that a winemaker defines their own personal style with.
All right. So before I get to my last question, I just saw Rob Waller flash across my screen, and I know he's muted, but I want to give a shout out because Rob is one of the best soccer coaches that my eldest daughter ever had, and she played on teams with his daughter Gracie. So great to see you here, Rob. So we're finally, I know a lot of you are anxious. We're about to get to the tasting portion of the evening, but as we transition to that, Jeff, we're going to be tasting them. Tell everybody about the varietals and the two wines that we're going to be tasting.
Yeah, definitely. Although first out, I just really do want to give a shout out to the Kim Jones screen. I always appreciate when people dress for the occasion. Here I am wearing what I realize now on this little screen looks like a bad attempt at a Han Solo vest or something. So slightly underdressed, but hopefully actually being at a winery helps to account for that. As it relates to the specific varieties, I think Split Rock Ranch has a super fun set of fruit to work with. For myself personally, Syrah, over my years in this industry, has become my favorite grape. I think it's probably the variety that best shows the climate and specific geographic area it was grown in. Cabernet is and probably always will be the king of wines, at least for our lifetime. I know it seems to change every 100 years or so, given that Riesling was probably the king in the early 1900s. But Petit Verdot just always going to be super important to the estate cuvee, especially. It's such a big, chewy, hearty variety to include in a blend that it's almost painfully difficult to make into a varietal wine, but also incredibly important to use in a Bordeaux blend. And finally, I think whether or not they'll admit it, the family's passion is the little gem of a Petit Syrah block that they farm and I think pour more heart and soul into than pretty much anyone else I know that runs a vineyard. And it's always just fun to try and guide that and turn it into everything that I think we're all hoping it will be, so we can always get our 50 cases or so of that variety to sell to those lucky few who get the opportunity to get some.
And by the way, for those who don't know, most of these wines are aged in barrique barrels that yield 25 cases per barrel. So when Jeff says 50 case production, it's a whopping 2 barrels. That's it. That's all there is. And None of their wines have a huge production, but even 100 case production is only 4 barrels. So there's not a lot of it. So at this point, Jeff, why don't you take us into the wonderful video that we're about to see?
Yeah, right on. Well, we're about to get to the tasting, but before we dive too deep into that program, we just thought you'd enjoy hearing from some of the Grades of Green's student eco leaders and the impact that all of your generous donations have made.
My name's Sam Torres.
I'm Vivica Henry.
I'm Isaiah Williams.
Hi, I'm Riley Goldfarb. I've been with Grades Green for about 9 or 10 years now. It's very much impacted my life.
So before I joined, I didn't realize how much power one person actually had, or like even one family has, on helping the environment.
I'm someone who loves to, get involved, be part of that action, and that gives me that drive and that passion for the environment. That's what essentially I think of when I think of Grades of Green.
Basically all my leadership can be attributed to Grades of Green because they've given me such a good platform to be able to do that.
The programs that Grades of Green does are very organized, but they're also very student-led. So our advisors are really there to be our support system and just make sure students are able to lead and have their voices heard.
Well, I think even though you have a passion and that desire to make a change in the environment, the one thing you need is to have that voice, to have that ability to speak out and discuss these environmental issues.
Learning to use your voice is really important, because even if we don't consider a young person's voice to be as important now, they're going to eventually get older and they're going to need to use their voice. And I think it's even better if they're learning at such a young age to be actual, forces in their community and be advocates for themselves and for the environment. That's really powerful to be able to do at a young age. And I think that's a beautiful thing that Grades of Green has been able to cultivate in their students.
Thank you for supporting Grades of Green. Because of you, I can teach people how to reduce their carbon footprint.
Because of you, I can protect our oceans from plastic pollution.
Because of you, I can plant trees to combat climate change.
Because of you, I can advocate for a zero-waste future.
Because of you, I can help conserve precious natural resources.
Because of you, I can advocate for a cooler planet.
Because of you, I can help my community lower its carbon footprint.
Thank you for supporting Grades of Green.
All right, so I have to say, I've been a lawyer and mostly a litigator for 37 years, and I'm embarrassed because those students did a much better job of speaking than I could ever do. Fantastic, wonderful for Grades of Green. Right now, I'm going to let Jeff take over the description of the wines and the tasting portion. But before we do that, I want to thank Grow, which is at 1830 Sepulveda Boulevard in Manhattan Beach, between Manhattan Beach Boulevard and Marine, for donating the wonderful charcuterie boxes that you all have, so we don't all go hungry. So with that, Jeff, take it away. Let's taste the wines and talk about them.
Right on. Well, perfect timing. I just had the chance to chime in and answer the Red Sox question on there. So always starting pitching. I personally typically will start off with the Syrah out of this lineup. Do you guys all have that open right now? All right. So, Syrah as a variety, again, probably my favorite variety out there. I think it covers a full flavor spectrum. There are some in warmer climates that will drive more in the red fruit direction. As you go into cooler climates, you'll get more of that purple dark fruit, along with just kind of this fresh cracked white pepper character. It can run from super light and linear and down the center of your palate all the way to just giant, broad, sort of monolithic styles of wine. You'll have unoaked Syrahs, you'll have oaky Syrahs, and just, for me, just incredibly expressive of the climate it was grown in. So This particular Syrah, the 2015, I should probably say something about the year in general. 15 was remembered as a hot year, but what people forget is that it actually had a incredibly cool springtime, which is why actually most of Paso Robles had just a horrific fruit set on their Syrah and Cabernet grapes specifically. So basically during the time of year when the flowers pollinate, it was so cold that the pollen tubules didn't actually form all the way and create whole fruit. Instead, they created just a lot of little green, tiny shot berries, and you'd have clusters that only had like 10 berries on them. It was incredibly frustrating year. But from everything I can tell, based on the yields that you ended up with, you actually had a really solid Syrah yield for the year. In a ton per acre sense, but the cab was definitely a little more of a struggle. And I learned a lot about plants and especially grapes during their formative seasons instead of just the ripening seasons that year. So no matter what they teach us all in school, we really learn everything that's relevant in the real world. But as it relates to this particular vintage, I just get super expressive amount of fruit coming right off the top. There's a subtle layer of black pepper going on in the background. Ultimately, I think it's really driven and carried by that kind of lush red berry fruit, a little bit of kind of fruits of the forest, as they would say in Germany, just, but super expressive. I think there's a nice vanilla underlying tone in there, and ultimately just a super enjoyable wine that I think really has a nice broad palate weight that's going to make it work well with anything on the heavier, more savory side.
Right, and I'll add to that one of the classic food pairings for the future of Syrah is lamb. Steak works too, but lamb is classic, especially because in France, Syrahs come from Hermitage and they have kind of a gaminess to them. So if you really want to enjoy Syrah, grill some great lamb chops and try it with that. And Syrah is my favorite varietal in Australia, where Jeff also worked for Molly Duker. It's called Shiraz, but it's the same varietal. And the essence of like hot climate Syrah is blackberry and blueberry, which I happen to love that fruit profile. So enjoy.
Was there a specific pairing they had in the food setup to go with that? Do you know, Grant?
I don't know, but I'm sure that any of the bigger cheeses would suffice. What do you think, Todd?
Well, I would say I didn't know what was going to be in the charcuterie plate. So there's a couple of cheeses that go great with the Syrah and other big red wines. And then there's a brie, which generally goes better with Chardonnays because it kind of gets overwhelmed by big red wines. But certainly the other cheeses and the salami are fantastic with the Syrah. And with the other wine as well, I might add, which we're going to get to right now.
Well, and I think, the other great thing about cheese, as it's going to pair with both of these wines, and the reason it is such a classic red wine pairing, is just that all those compounds we keep mentioning, the tannin, it's actually a cumulative sort of buildup, and it's something that just feels increasingly drying and really pulls all the moisture off of your tongue and on your palate. And what happens with cheese is the protein from that actually counteracts that feeling. So that's why it's almost this natural pairing we crave, is to have either like a meat or a cheese, something with all of that protein in it when we're having a big, heavy tannic red wine.
Right. And I'll just say, it's not in this particular charcuterie box, but for future reference, if you want to have a great pairing, have a big red wine like Cabernet and Syrah with blue cheese. If you like blue cheese, that's a fantastic pairing that you'll never go away from after that.
Which you can also get at Grow.
And I'm sure you can get all of these things we're talking about at Grow for sure. Yes. Oh, I want to mention, hold on. I want to mention, because I I was dilatory in doing this, that Grow has Thanksgiving dinners that you can still order up until tomorrow. So if you have not figured out what you're doing for Thanksgiving yet, and you want a completely pre-prepared meal, contact Grow and they will help you. They're ready to go. Go ahead, Jeff.
Isn't Sauterne and blue cheese supposed to be the classic pairing?
That would be great too, but I'd go with the foie gras.
Yes.
Except that it's not legal anymore in California, but I'd risk it.
They legalized it, actually.
I'd risk it. They legalized it and then unlegalized it. It's been a journey, but I'd risk it because there's little that's better in the food and wine world than a glass of Yquem, Chateau Yquem, and a great foie gras.
So moving on, or I should say that's a specific French dessert wine that we were joking about there. But going on now to the claret style bottle that's came in your package there, the Estate Cuvée. This is a blend that changes a little bit every year. So the goal of it is just for it to be sort of a super blend, basically, kind of the best parts of the estate that really come together and form that big, structured, super age-worthy wine. As I mentioned previously, 2015 was a very wonky year to be farming. I think that's a technical term, but
love that term.
I know it well.
Ultimately, there was not a lot of cab to be had that year from anywhere in Paso, realistically speaking. So this is probably, I'm going to guess, the lowest percentage of cab you're ever going to see in the Estate Cuvée. So it's an interesting year in that you have a higher Syrah percentage, and just due to total blend percentages, also a really good hefty chunk of Petite Syrah from the vintage. So you really get to see the interplay of three varieties. The first thing that comes off to my nose anyways is I get a much earthier character coming out of this. You see more of like the leathery side of Syrah, along with that kind of slightly aged, earthier character that Cabernet can produce. And this is where it comes up, I think, probably just because my grandmother used to whoop my butt in Scrabble every weekend when I was a kid. But I like to collect strange words. And I think jokingly I've gone back and forth with Grant and Shea just on tasting notes, because my choice of verbiage sometime does not jive with what we really want to connect with the marketing. But I will pull one out here that we've laughed at before, which is I do very much get a sense of petrichor on the nose of this wine, which is one of my favorite words that actually describes the smell that you'll notice outside if it just rained after a really long dry spell. So it's basically that wet earth sort of smell, and something that jumps right out of the glass at me here.
Did not know there was a word for that.
Well, we do now.
Later, Jeff, about playing Scrabble, because Scrabble's a thing for me. So we're going to play for cases of William Robert wine if the Kirkpatrick's agree and they want to put their money on you.
No, I would not gamble on me. I definitely did not win those exchanges, but at the very least, I think it helped my verbal SAT score.
So Jeff, true disclosure here, you know, we have left the wine tasting to you and Jack. Jack, who most of you know, our oldest son, has an amazing connection, the cranial olfactory connection. We're not even in the ballpark of what Jeff and Jack can do when they're talking about different, varietals that are from the same block, the micro block, as he said, and they're putting them in 100% new oak and 50% oak, and the two of them know the difference. We can't do that. So we're blessed to have at least one member of the family who can keep up with Jeff, and as we move on, and one of the beautiful things about wine is I think of it as generational, and Jack's already in the hunt in terms of determining where all this is going with Jeff. So it's pretty fun.
Well, and my goal every year is to, provide guidance where wanted and necessary. But, I love to try and push yourselves and Jack and anyone else who wants to be involved more to kind of coming to conclusions of where blends should go themselves. It's my job to be a guide in the process, but I am in no way a fan of unilateral decision making in much of any sense. So, to me, I've failed even if the wine is great, but it's not, what represents what you all were hoping to accomplish. So I think it always has to be a team-oriented decision for sure. But what do you guys think of the structure of this wine too? Like, this is, I think, a good place to differentiate two things. One that we've already been talking about, which is tannin, which is sort of that drying sensation you get on your mouth right after you swallow. For me, this wine has more of that sensation than the Syrah. However, I'll say the opposite of that, or the other aspect of wine we talk about physically, is like the sense of body, just kind of the heft and the plushness and the weight it has on your palate. And for me, the Syrah has bigger body, while this wine has bigger structure.
Right. And my comment would be, much as I love Syrah, because it's my favorite varietal, the blend is more complex because it has 3 different varietals in it than the Syrah. And that comes out to me when I taste them, for sure.
And Jeff, maybe you can suggest what role the Petit Verdot has on the back end for this blend.
So in my days working in Napa, I used to like to describe Petit Verdot as all structure, no fruit. It just has this incredibly monstrous, monolithic, angular type of tannin to it. And it's the kind of wine, the couple times I've worked with it and made it into 100% varietal wine, like, you watch kind of what I'll call the masochistic wine drinker, which is a very American concept because, it's the bigger is always better sort of thing. So, you watch someone as it strips all the enamel off their teeth and they're like doing the Keystone Light bitter beer face thing while going, "This is so good." And that's, obviously hyperbole. It's never quite like that. But at the same time, it is just such a monstrous, grippy wine that I really think it adds in small amounts, or all you have to do is blend in small amounts, and it just adds this really powerful back end to the finish of a wine. You're not going to notice it up front, but then as it creeps across your palate, the acidity of that Petit Verdot really comes in, and it keeps it a little more on the straight and narrow going down your tongue. Whereas the Syrah, which is a little less acidic, is really a lot broader and sort of goes back in this flat sort of way. And just, at the end of it, where you swallow and it really starts to pull the moisture out of the back of your tongue, like a big chunk of that is absolutely in the Petit Verdot.
So, a curious question, Jeff. Petit Verdot is known for adding a cedary component to wines. Do you detect that in the cuvee?
I certainly think there's notes of it in there, but I also think there's just certain aromatics that everyone kind of detects a little bit differently. So for me, cedary tends to be much more of a kind of oak component or characteristic. Mm-hmm. The other funny thing I think often is when you hear people use the term graphite, I think they're often referring to just the smell of pencils in general, which to me is much more from the cedar surrounding the little bit of graphite than from the pencil lead itself. But it's always fascinating to see how it goes. And even I've always found it hilarious, and I think it's more of a genetic differentiation, how people describe the smell of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, because to me it just smells like boxwood and gooseberry, which I have never ever in my life conflated with the smell of a kitty litter box. But so many people smell otherwise, and to me that's probably I suspect it's much more along the lines of some people have the genetic ability to, smell the after effects of eating asparagus, and other people don't. And
Jeff, for the record, I don't think we want our wine to smell or resemble anything like a kitty litter box.
Well, luckily you guys don't grow any Sauvignon Blanc, so you are 100% free of the chance of that happening. Unless
I can tell you, Jeff knows this, of course, but in areas of France where Sauvignon Blanc is king, when it's young, it smells like cat pee. I mean, to be brutally honest, and one of the great producers in the world, whose name is Didio D'Agano, when you taste his wines when they're young, you think you're drinking cat pee, and then they age, and it's miraculous what happens to them. But don't drink them when they're young, unless you like cat pee.
Well, but that's where I would say you have the genetic ability to smell that, and thankfully,
I definitely do. Sadly.
So before we get off Petit Verdot, we have one great comment that just came in from your friend Dr. Jones in the Tux, who said Petit Verdot is the bass player in a band.
As a former bassist, I can get down with that.
Wow.
Beautiful.
Very good analogy, because people don't realize that a lot of drummers actually have a amp directly connected to the bass player that sits right behind them, and it's secretly the bassist keeping the whole band on time.
Well, I can tell you, if the bass player is Stanley Clark, I'm all in.
I'm more of a Les Claypool guy, and he has his own winery in
I
Sonoma.
work with that, and I'll go with Geddy Lee as well.
No, that's fair.
All right, this is what we had going on when these two met. Yeah, you guys definitely.
Thank you, Shea, for keeping us on track, because Jeff and I could go for hours.
I'd also like to throw out to the whole group here. I mean, again, you've got me at your disposal, Todd, everyone else. So any questions you've always had about wine but didn't want to ask, feel free to throw it in the group chat, and I'll try and get you a no nonsense, probably way too technical sort of answer.
Awesome. All right, so we don't really. I'm looking at the text box, and we don't really have any questions that need to be answered except for Boston Red Sox closers, which Jeff has already answered. My answer is the Dodger pitching is obviously the best, because that's why they won the World Series. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Shea.
Well, I noticed a question. We were asked if we live in Paso Robles.
Yes.
Yes, and we do not live there full time. We are very lucky enough, especially during this time, that we go back and forth a lot more than normal times right now. We do get up there a lot. It's maybe 4.5 hours when there was a lot of traffic, but right now it's pretty quick to get there. So we right now we're going a couple times a month, but we do not live there full time.
And
but
just
Jeff does, for the record.
Yes.
I've spent a little bit of time here,
Oh, certainly, yes.
I do want to chime in though and say I think Shea underplays the commitment that the family has. You guys spend more time at your ranch than I think a lot of growers I know that live in Paso, quite frankly. I'm always impressed, and maybe it's just that a childhood of my family choosing to drive on all of our long vacations has made me hate spending time in the car. But the commitment it takes to do that long drive with the frequency that you guys do, and with the fact that usually you're driving two vehicles that appear to be completely stuffed with food and supplies, like you're going on a 30-person Cub Scouts outing, always impresses the heck out of me. So,
well, just for the record, it's 3.5 hours from where we are to Paso. So if any of you on this chat are going to go to Paso to go have a great wine weekend, let us know. We've got a little cheat sheet: restaurants, places to stay, the right wineries to visit. We've kind of culled it down because as we've been, pummeled through the years about where should we go for going that direction, we've just put this all together, and now it's just, the area has just exploded.
But I'll say there are people on here right now that actually almost go to Paso more than we do, and we're
there are some
oftentimes asking them.
devotees, yeah.
So it is such a great town, and it's grown a lot since we first started going. But it is a lot of fun. There's a lot of
wonderful
great
weekend.
restaurants, great wineries.
Yes, I can personally recommend Paso for the quality of the wines. If you know where you're going, which Shea and Grant can help you with, the restaurants are fantastic. It's kind of like Napa about 30 years ago. So you don't have all the craziness and the hubbub. Easy to get reservations, but great wines in Paso.
Yeah, good. I noticed in the chat we already have some requests. So yeah, Dave, don't worry, coming your way. Just put it in there. We'll get you that cheat sheet. Let's see. Dave had another question too.
Well, and because hang on, because I said we're 4.5 hours away, we are actually almost an hour from the heart of the town of Paso. We're on Lake Nacimiento, which is about 50 minutes from the town, past Justin Vineyards, if anyone's been there or heard of them.
Yeah. So thanks for all the nice compliments, you guys. It's really, really fun. I'm glad you think the cuvee is yummy. Okay, that's good. Jeff, there's a question from David about, can you talk a little bit more about Paso? What makes it so special as a wine growing region?
Sure. And my answers are written in the group chat as well, in case you all want to look at that. If my voice makes you guys nod off like some of my students back in grad school. But that said, I think three things. First off, we have, of all the regions I've seen, probably the largest diurnal temperature shift. So that means the difference between daytime high and nighttime low. You know, I've seen days with a high of 108 degrees that still had a low of 45, 48 degrees overnight. And that swing really drives the vines to wake up and shut down every day, and really just drives them towards producing those big, bold fruit flavors that you're used to from the area, as well as just all that body and tannin and structure. Secondly, we just have lots of great soil types out here, especially as previously mentioned, those limestone, calcareous, linicoloto style soils that you've heard so much about. It's a legit thing, and it's awesome to see. And finally, I think maybe the most defining characteristic for this region is we don't have any of those limiting rules that everywhere else does. Most of France and Italy regions will have only specific grapes they're allowed to grow based more on history and marketing, outside of maybe the Languedoc, and I always like to call Paso the Languedoc of California anyways. But we are truly able and fortunate enough to just grow the wines that we think will do best on our individual properties out here. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to work with over 25 different varieties every year. And we have the opportunity to just make the wines that we think are best and most expressive, regardless of, what rules or boxes that other regions are trying to fit stuff into. So for me, that's Paso in a nutshell.
That's great. Do they grow any wine in Indiana, Jeff? Do you know? We have some.
Actually, I worked at Molly Duker with a woman who was the daughter of the family that I think had the largest winery in Indiana, as I recall. But I've actually spent a fair bit of time out there just from having a family in Indianapolis over the years. So have made many a pilgrimage to the Motor Speedway.
Well, we have some of those obnoxious Hoosiers, obviously wanting us to pin their videos. So just asking. I do believe
that's redundant, Grant.
I do believe they make wine in every state of the union, which is will surprise you.
It's really crazy.
But yeah, wine is grown everywhere.
And the one in Hawaii, they planted in the worst possible spot. I mean, right next to the volcano on Big Island. That
oh, gosh.
In my mind.
And how does that work out with all the rain and all the ash?
Well, you kind of have to find, for any region, I mean, Indiana included, you have to find the grapes that work best for your growing season. In Hawaii, well, on Big Island, that means finding sulfur tolerant grapes from the amount of fog being put up from the volcano. In Indiana and Missouri and other regions kind of in the central US, it involves finding grapes that have a shorter ripening season and a lot more mold and mildew tolerance, because the summer in those areas just gives the grapes much more challenging conditions. Given that it's so dry out here in Paso, even though it gets hot, we don't really have to worry about clearing out moisture and mildew as we hit July and August every year.
Yeah, great.
And I will say, for those who find themselves in Indianapolis, you want to go to St. Elmo's Steakhouse. You can bring your own wine. Great steaks. Been there forever.
Is that right, Jim? Just give me a nod.
I was interested. I heard St. Elmo's, and I thought at first he was talking about the brewery down in Austin, which I've been to a couple times. But my parents didn't really take us to steakhouses, and we were driving out there as a family. I can tell you about whatever pizza place also had video games for the kids to play. But been a few years since I've been out that way.
Okay, so we've got a couple other things here. Let's see. We had one person was in the chat room here. Oh, we're getting more questions here. So cheat sheet, no coming.
We will email that to everybody.
Yeah, I think looking at the there's a lot of talk about farming, sustainable farming. And of course, when we started this endeavor, it was important to Shea and me to see how that could be done. And you guys have probably experienced, there's several different certifications or groups that do that kind of farming. And basically, and Jeff, you could speak more eloquently to this, but when we looked into it, farming is a lot of labor. And so if you've got room for a dozen goats, you don't have to mow and use gas to use your mower. And if you've got a lot of labor that can, help every vine with pesticides instead of spraying it with herbicide, these are ways to sustainably farm. But as much as we looked into it and wanted to do it, we can only take certain measures in that regard.
We're doing what we can do, but
so for instance, our irrigation is all lake water. We have a pump that is down in the lake, almost 2,000 feet from the vineyard. And we pump up about 180 vertical feet, 2,000 horizontal feet of water from the lake. The lake is all runoff. There's no groundwater, no snow melt. So we think about our irrigation as sustainable. It's whatever water rolls out of the hills through the years and goes back into the land. So we're doing some things to work in that direction. But the reality is, and it's really interesting, we'd love to be a sustainable farming operation, but that's an expensive, time-consuming, and difficult thing to get certified officially.
Well, I would actually add in, I think there's a degree to which we all get attached to certain words and think, that word being there makes one thing better than another. Sustainability, kind of the inside industry joke with the kind of SIP sort of program has always been that more than any other program, it requires the most paperwork and destroys the most trees. But, I've always been a big fan of organics and being organic whenever possible. Yeah, and there's always trade-offs that come with that. I've been in the process of switching another property to organics over the last year or two. And one thing that surprises people is when you go organic, it actually requires more spray passes in the vineyard because organic organic applications don't last as long. So you end up annoying your neighbors more often. So I think at the end of the day, where my heart has always been is that the less, you're adding in that isn't naturally there, the more you are just trying to be minimalist with the property and do what you know is right and not add lots of synthetic compounds and other things that don't need to be there. The more you're just out there paying attention to your vineyard and catching problems as they're just starting instead of noticing them when they become full blown and then having to react instead of being proactive. That's where I think the best union of, health for the globe and for the land and making it the most long-term sustainable thing that we can really is. And I've always tried to preach just being present and caring much more than what labels we attach to it. And again, that's where I have so much respect for Grant and Shea and Jack, and just seeing how much time they spend out there and really trying to catch things before they happen and before anything goes wrong, and really being as minimalist and non-interventionalist as possible.
Appreciate that. So one of the questions also was, how can we order more of the wine, which is actually a compliment. Thank you. The website is williamrobertwines.com.
And you'll, at the end of this, we'll have a slide that will have that.
Yeah.
So you
can order right off of there. The 2015s are limited now because obviously we've moved on. The 2017 vintage is what's on the website. And you can order as much of that as you'd like, same varietals. And then our 2018 is now in the bottle and will be available soon. 2019 is in the barrels, and Jeff, you can see them right behind Jeff's left and right ear, and they're looking good.
Yeah, that's not a background. I can actually run behind the glass and tap on the other side.
And Jeff, exactly where is the 2020 vintage? That harvest was 2 months ago now. Where does that lie?
So everything has been barreled down. I'd say about a third of the wines are already through malolactic fermentation. That is the secondary fermentation that converts malic acid to lactic acid.
Yeah, that's sexy when you start throwing that shit out. I love that.
But we're probably about another month and a half away from everything getting through there, and then being able to rack the wines back out, get them off their lees, so all that sediment that settles down in the bottom, pulling that out of there, and just having them cleaned up and ready for true élevage.
Very nice. So one of the things to note, the wine you're drinking tonight was rated, let's see, the Syrah was rated a 91 and the Estate Cuvée was rated a 90 by Wine Enthusiast. But what's also exciting is our 2017 that you can buy on the website was rated with the same scores by Jeb Dunnick, another respected wine critic. And, the reality is—
in the reverse.
In the reverse, yeah. But, to get these wines at a very, this endeavor in the wine world is still at a very young age, but we're starting out strong, and Jeff is going to take us to the next level. We don't care that much about the scores. We much rather like the stuff that you guys are throwing in the chat, like yummy and how can I get more? Love that. It's a wine made for sharing with friends and family, and also our intent always is to support important causes with the wine, like Grades of Green. So,
well, and I think the exciting thing for me is also looking forward to the release of some of the changes that we've made over time. I know when you guys release the 2018 vintage, for instance, you're going to have the first ever William Robert Cabernet Sauvignon produced as a varietal wine. So, going back to the micro production level, but there, I think we only bottled 48 cases of that guy. So just another thing to keep your eye on for the future.
That's Jack with his, great nose and eye for this stuff. He and Jeff were really directing us towards that, and we're excited because we haven't had a straight cab. So
it was never our intent to produce a straight Cabernet, but Jeff singled out our Block 4 cab, different than our Block 3, different hillside, different aspect ratios, very some elements of terroir that are just fundamentally different, and that it was really doing well. So we decided to separately harvest and ferment and produce this Cabernet, which should be out in another year. It's pretty stunning one. So it'll be fun to see how that goes. And while I'm on that subject, let's see, David Hughes chimed in and said, are we planning to plant or grow any more varietals? And what a question that is.
In fact, Jeff, are you ready for this?
We were just talking about the other day. There's a canyon that is just begging to be planted, unfortunately.
Which we always say, so we have land that we planted on, and then we have other land that it has nothing on it. And we've always said, okay, that's for our kids. Yeah. They can figure that out.
Jack can take care of that.
But well, and not to say, he does have a brother and sister that you never know. They are going to get their hands in there too.
But if we do, it would be Grenache. It is a varietal that I wanted to plant initially, but it's a temperamental varietal. It needs more love, more attention, more labor.
That's why we're going to have Jack do that.
But it's very possible. We have a growing love for Grenache, 100% Grenache, which is also a really interesting growing marketplace for that varietal in demand. And around where we are, in fact, last weekend we were at Booker, for those of you that know Booker Winery, and they have 100% Grenache called the Ripper. And it's
so good.
It's really something. And there are others. Jeff, you could speak to that varietal in particular, I know.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, I think even that as a varietal has a great history throughout the world. I mean, you look at France and Grenache being the basis for Châteauneuf-du-Pape wines most typically, or if you get more obscure in the Southern Rhone, regions like, Gigondas and Vaucluse, where it's more traditionally even 100% Grenache. So many wines in Spain are varietal Garnacha, or even if you go to Italy, it has the even more obscure name of Cananao. So many great Grenache varietal wines out there, and also a number of incredible ones here in California, Australia, Washington State. Again, it has some of that same characteristic of Syrah, where it really shows differently depending where it was grown, cooler climate or warmer climate. And I might even argue that I think Grenache might be the wine where I believe the actual clone of Grenache that you use matters more than anything else.
Interesting. Yeah, all of our clones when we planted were Topless Creek.
Do you want to explain more what that is?
Well, yeah, every varietal, the actual vinifera of the wine, the Cabernet Sauvignon vinifera or the Syrah vinifera or Petit Verdot, is grafted onto a rootstock. That's the little bubble that they graft in the nursery. And the rootstock is engineered for that particular type of soil. So that's an important distinction that we're able to do in modern winemaking times, to tune the rootstock, what grows underneath the ground, to that soil, so that the vinifera above is it has the proper nutrition and terroir ingredients. So we're lucky that we're able to do that, and we have some really tremendous sources. Topless Creek, a fairly famous local winery to us, sort of the what would you call them, Jeff? The birthplace of the Rhone Rangers in our Paso area.
So Topless Creek, it has a sister winery and shared ownership with Beaucastel, Domaine de Beaucastel, in the Châteauneuf-du-Pape region of France. So they actually imported all sorts of original cuttings of all the different Rhone varieties into the country here back, 35 or so years ago, and actually started a nursery that not only provided their own grapes, but also sold cuttings and propagation to so many of the different wineries here in California.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, Jeff. Was Tobless Creek before John Albin, who I consider to be the original Rhone Ranger, who brought in the Rhone varietals to California?
I don't know who came first. I mean, they were around the same time. I totally agree with you that it was really John Albin and his cohorts that actually used the name the Rhone Rangers, and probably more than anyone else, that name got proliferated by Randall Graham up at Noon. Of course, out of all those companies, he was the best marketer and the worst businessman, very much P.T. Barnum style, the funeral for the cork and all that sort of stuff. But, I think Tobless Creek really did it for themselves in a non-promotional way. And I think still in this area, especially, just has an infinite amount of respect. And I always tell folks when they're on their first trip to Paso, even if they're hunting for, Syrahs and the super intense American style of Rhones, you owe it to yourself to make an appointment out at Tobless and go check out their wines, because they're so much the basis and connected to the history of all of these grapes that we grow, and such an important foundational part of Paso Robles history.
So I have to add, and Jeff and I discussed this when we had our previous conversation, but Randall Graham is the owner of a winery called Bonnie Doon, and he puts out a newsletter. And Randall Graham is an MIT alum, as am I, and I would get his newsletter, and he would pontificate on a variety of subjects, and I would read it, and I'd read it 5 times. I had no idea what he was saying. He's so out there and so esoteric, but he makes some good wine, some not so great, and some amazingly great.
Well, I should say he sold the winery officially a year and a half ago.
Oh, okay.
So he's not involved anymore, but still, if you look through the older wines and the history, and his only remaining project that he's directing, it has some other long philosophical name to it, but is a fascinating collection of oddball varieties that he planted on another property kind of in the middle of nowhere in a non-traditional region. So
and that sounds exactly like Randall, but I will tell the folks here, I don't know if he continued to make it, but he made a dessert wine that was artificially frozen to be an ice wine called Vin de Glacier that was $15 a half bottle. That was one of the best values on the planet if you have a sweet tooth and love dessert wines. And Jeff and I talked about it, and Jeff agrees with that.
Oh, you guys are making Gareth so happy right now. Gareth, I hope you're listening to all this. He's a big Rhone guy.
He is. Hey, I just want to thank everyone for not only supporting Grades of Green, but drinking our wine and
just being
here, and supporting each other too. This is such a crazy time, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. So cheers.
Yes, cheers to everybody.
Yes, thank you everybody for coming. Fantastic, awesome. Jeff, as we would expect, was the star of the show because he's got all the knowledge about everything.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeff.
That he is.
Thanks to all of you guys for supporting Grades of Green. I think what we're doing here and trying to accomplish is just super important as we move forward in the world. And I think just proving to our next generation that we all have the ability to affect a change is always going to be an important lesson that we need to teach. So cheers to all of you guys.
Cheers.
Yes.
Awesome. Cheers. L'chaim to everybody.
And cheers to the 2 other Jeffs that are on this call too, Jeff Wilson, and
there's lots of Jeffs.
So many good folks with Grades of Green who've been with us for God knows how long. From the beginning now.
Everyone, thank you so much. And let's see, James, if you want to put up that last slide that we had mentioned we would have for you, so you can see. Thank you again to Grow for this incredible charcuterie box that they donated the entire thing to this event.
Thank you,
Vino.
Bravo, Grow.
Thank you. And again, if you haven't purchased your Thanksgiving, they have already made things, and they also have things that you can buy your turkey and cook it at your own house. And then thank you so much to Todd, who moderated this fabulously, and his company Vino Quest. If you are looking for wine that you can't find anywhere, he's got it. He would be a fabulous source for you.
Truly my pleasure. Thank you very much. What a great cause.
Thank you. And then to our incredible winemaker, Jeff, who is not only that, but he's just a great human being that is really fun to be around. And
I believe my title is wine plumber. That's what I gave myself.
Yes, wine plumber, right. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your support, and maybe we'll do this again. Be fun.
Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the wine.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
All right.
Cheers.
Bye.